In the spring of 1937, in a maintenance corridor beneath the Supreme Court building in Washington, a plumber adjusting a corroded valve discovered something that contradicted the architectural drawings filed with the District Building Commission. The blueprints, stamped and approved in 1932, showed a standard drainage system, pipes descending to connect with the city's sanitary infrastructure. What the plumber found instead was a sealed concrete chamber, 20 feet deep, accessed by a narrow steel ladder bolted to the wall. His work light illuminated standing water at the bottom, dark and still, its surface reflecting the rough concrete walls. No drain, no connection to any sewer line, just a rectangular void, 40 feet long, 15 feet wide, filled to a depth of 3 feet with water that should not have been there. The official record states that reflecting pools at government buildings were decorative features, designed to mirror classical architecture and create visual symmetry. Yet a marginal note in the construction supervisor's daily log, dated March 14, 1937, records a conversation with the project architect. The note, written in pencil and later partially erased, reads, "Asked about the basement chamber, said it matches the exterior pool dimensions exactly, said it was structural, would not elaborate." The basement chamber's measurements, 40 feet by 15 feet, matched the reflecting pool visible in the building's front plaza to within 6 inches. One pool above ground, ornamental and photographed. One pool below ground, sealed and forgotten. By the autumn of 1938, similar discoveries began appearing in maintenance records across Washington. A janitor at the Library of Congress reported water damage in a subfloor space that architectural plans insisted did not exist. The water, he noted in a work order dated October 22, 1938, came from nowhere and drained to nowhere, just sits there making the concrete sweat. An electrician working at the National Archives that same winter described drilling through a basement wall and hitting a void that echoed like a cave. When he shone his flashlight through the hole, he saw water. His supervisor ordered the hole sealed with hydraulic cement, and the incident report was filed in a folder marked Structural Anomalies, Routine. The pattern persists across decades, across cities, across government architecture of a specific era. Reflecting pools, installed with elaborate ceremony, documented in official photographs, praised in newspaper articles for their aesthetic contribution, then, within years or sometimes decades, quietly filled in, drained, or converted to planters. The explanations vary: maintenance costs, water conservation, security concerns, liability issues. Yet the timing aligns too precisely to be coincidence, and the archival record reveals erasures, contradictions, dates that shift depending on which document you consult. The camera traces the edge of a filled-in pool at the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, completed in 1975. Old photographs show water reflecting the brutalist concrete facade, a mirror image that doubled the building's imposing geometry. By 1983, less than a decade after the building's dedication, the pool was drained. Official records cite budget constraints and minimal aesthetic value. However, a memo dated June 1982, obtained through a FOIA request and heavily redacted, references acoustic concerns and frequency interference patterns detected during routine monitoring. The sections before and after this phrase are blacked out. The pool was filled with concrete and paved over by January 1983. The construction crew, according to union records, completed the work during a single weekend when the building was closed. Focus shifts to a photograph taken on September 3, 1963, in front of the Thomas Jefferson Building at the Library of Congress. The image, preserved in the library's own archives, shows the reflecting pool at full capacity, its surface mirror smooth in the early morning light. In the foreground, a woman in a dark coat stands at the pool's edge, one hand raised to her temple, as if shielding her eyes or pressing against a headache. Behind her, barely visible in the photograph's grain, 2 more figures stand in similar postures. The caption, typed on the reverse side of the print, reads, "Morning Visitors, September 1963. A second notation, added later in different handwriting, says, "Query, why so early? Building opens 10 a.m. The pool was drained for maintenance in October 1963 and never refilled." Inside the National Archives, in Record Group 121, Records of the Public Buildings Service, A researcher flipping through construction correspondence from the 1930s finds a letter dated February 19th, 1936. The letter, from the supervising architect to the director of procurement, discusses specifications for the reflecting pools being installed at multiple federal buildings under construction. Most of the letter concerns mundane details: concrete thickness, waterproofing membranes, filtration systems, then a single paragraph. Per our conversation of the 14th instant, the subsurface components will be constructed to the revised specifications you provided verbally, and I have not committed these specifications to written record per your instruction. The drawings will show only standard drainage infrastructure. No explanation follows. No revised specifications appear in any subsequent file. Rain drums on the pavement outside the former federal building in Seattle, built in 1933, demolished in 1973. Archival photographs show it featured a large reflecting pool in its central courtyard, surrounded by colonnades in the neoclassical style. A preservation report from 1972, arguing against the building's demolition, notes that the reflecting pool had been mysteriously drained in 1951 and subsequently filled with gravel and soil. The report's author and Charles, architectural historian, adds in a footnote, "The decision to drain the pool is not documented in any accessible city or federal records." Building employees interviewed for this report recalled that the draining occurred over a single night in late spring, and that access to the courtyard was restricted for several days afterward. One former custodian stated that the gravel fill was trucked in by the Army Corps of Engineers, though no requisition or contract for such work exists in municipal archives. The pattern appears not only in Washington, but in state capitals, in federal courthouses, in government complexes across the country. Sacramento, California. The reflecting pool at the state capitol, installed in 1947, drained in 1958. Indianapolis, Indiana. Pools flanking the city-county building, completed in 1962, filled in by 1969. Albany, New York. The plaza pools at the Empire State Plaza, opened in 1978, drained and converted to raised planters by 1985. Each transformation comes with official explanations: maintenance, costs, safety, aesthetics, but rarely with detailed documentation. The decisions appear in meeting minutes as single-line items. The work happens quickly, often during holidays or weekends. A close-up reveals a page from a contractor's bid book dated November 1934 for work on federal buildings in the District of Columbia. The page lists materials and labor costs for pool installation and subsurface work. Two line items stand out. The first, excavation, standard pool basin, 4 feet depth. The second, immediately below, excavation, lower chamber, 18 feet depth. The costs for the lower chamber exceed those for the visible pool by a factor of 3. A note in the margin, in the same hand that wrote the bid amounts, says, "Client insists lower chamber remains unspecified in public-facing documents. Payment structure adjusted accordingly." The bid was accepted. The contractor, a firm called Meridian Construction, completed work on 11 federal buildings between 1934 and 1939. No records of Meridian construction exist after 1945. By the winter of 1940, in a small office at the Bureau of Standards in Washington, an acoustical engineer named Howard Fletcher compiled measurements from various government buildings constructed during the previous decade. Fletcher, whose published work focused on speech intelligibility and room acoustics, kept a private notebook that was donated to the Smithsonian Institution in 1978, 30 years after his death. The notebook contains frequency response measurements taken in the lobbies and public spaces of 12 federal buildings. Each building featured a reflecting pool in its exterior plaza or interior courtyard. Each measurement session, Fletcher noted, was conducted with pool at operational capacity. The notebook does not explain what operational capacity means beyond water level. However, several entries include the phrase "standing wave interference patterns detected," followed by frequency notations: 7.8 Hz, 14.1 Hz, 20.3 Hz. These frequencies fall below the threshold of normal human hearing, but within the range that can be felt as vibration or pressure. Fletcher's notes for a session on March 6, 1940, at the Supreme Court building describe an unusual phenomenon. Pool surface showed visible oscillation during measurement period, though no wind and no mechanical disturbance observed. Oscillation frequency matched calculated resonance for chamber depth, 22.6 feet including subsurface volume. Building occupants interviewed afterward reported discomfort, pressure in ears, mild vertigo, sense of unease, verbatim from 3 separate subjects. Effects ceased when pool was drained for scheduled maintenance. The entry ends with a question written in the margin: intentional or oversight? Fletcher conducted no further measurements in government buildings after June 1940. His later work focused exclusively on telephone audio quality. The camera lingers on the surface of a remaining reflecting pool, one of the few never drained or filled in. The pool at the Lincoln Memorial, installed in 1922. Morning light catches ripples moving across the water, radiating from no visible source. A commuter pauses on his walk across the Memorial Bridge, watching the pattern. The ripples form concentric rings that seem to originate from multiple points simultaneously, interfering with each other to create standing wave patterns visible on the surface. The commuter, an engineer by profession, later describes the pattern in an online forum, posting under a pseudonym. The pool acts like a massive oscillator. I don't know what frequency, but you can see it in the wave pattern, clear as day, like something pulsing from underneath. I went back 3 mornings in a row. Same pattern, always around 7:15 a.m. I timed it. Other users respond with similar observations from different times of day. The thread is deleted after 6 weeks. No explanation is provided. In 1946, a classified study conducted by the Army Corps of Engineers examined structural considerations for public buildings in urban centers. The study, declassified in 1996 with heavy redactions, includes a section titled Subsurface Water Features, Acoustic Implications. Most of the section's content is blacked out, but several paragraphs remain legible. One discusses the properties of water-filled concrete chambers in relation to seismic activity. A chamber of sufficient volume, when filled with water to a precise depth, can act as a passive damping system, absorbing and dissipating vibrational energy across a broad frequency range. Another paragraph, 2 pages later, mentions unintended resonance effects when multiple structures in proximity feature identical or harmonically related chamber dimensions. The study recommends that future construction minimize such features, and that existing installations be evaluated for modification or decommissioning. Focus shifts to a construction photograph dated April 1938, showing workers installing a reflecting pool at a federal courthouse in Miami. The image, taken from an elevated angle, shows the excavation for the pool, a rectangular pit perhaps 5 feet deep. However, at the bottom of the pit, visible in the photograph's lower left corner, is the opening to a much deeper excavation, a square shaft perhaps 4 feet on each side, descending into darkness. 3 workers stand near this opening. One holds a surveying rod, another points downward. The third, barely visible in the photograph's edge, appears to be descending a ladder. The photograph's caption, stamped on the back, reads, "Pool installation, April 1938, routine construction." The Miami courthouse's reflecting pool was drained in 1954 after Hurricane Hazel. It was never refilled. The courthouse was demolished in 1976. The demolition contract specified that all subsurface structures be thoroughly excavated and backfilled with compacted earth. Witnesses recalled that the demolition took longer than expected. A heavy equipment operator, interviewed for a local history project in 1983, described breaking through the courthouse's foundation. "We figured the basement went down maybe 15 feet, standard for that era, kept digging. 20 feet, 25 feet, found a concrete room down there, walls smooth as glass, floor covered in silt. Foreman said fill it, don't ask questions. We dumped half the building into that hole before it filled up." The interviewer asked what the room might have been for. The operator said, "Storage, I guess, but why so deep? And why seal it up so tight? It had a steel door, rusted through, but you could see it was built to lock from the outside. Storage room you lock from the outside. You figure that out." The record shows that between 1930 and 1960, at least 74 federal and state government buildings in the United States featured reflecting pools in their architectural plans. Of these, 61 have had their pools drained, filled in, or removed entirely. The process accelerated in the 1950s and again in the early 1980s. The reasons given follow a narrow script: maintenance, cost, safety, aesthetics. Yet the buildings themselves remain in use. Their other water features, fountains, decorative channels, even rooftop irrigation systems, continue to operate. Only the reflecting pools, those broad, shallow basins designed to mirror the buildings they adorn, have been systematically eliminated. In 2003, during renovation work at the Tennessee State Capitol in Nashville, construction crews discovered an anomaly beneath the building's North Plaza. The plaza, installed in 1955, featured a reflecting pool that was drained in 1973 and covered with concrete pavers in 1977. Removal of the pavers for the 2003 renovation revealed the original pool basin, cracked but intact. Beneath the basin, visible through the cracks, was a void. Engineers brought in ground-penetrating radar and discovered a chamber extending 18 feet below the plaza surface, rectangular in shape, with dimensions matching the reflecting pool exactly. The chamber was empty, its concrete walls dry. An access hatch, sealed with riveted steel plates, was found on the chamber's north wall. The renovation project's lead engineer attempted to open the hatch. The rivets had corroded beyond the point where they could be removed without cutting. The engineer requisitioned a plasma cutter. Before the equipment arrived, the project received new directives from the State Facilities Board. Leave the subsurface chamber sealed, reinforce the plaza surface, continue work on above-ground features only. The chamber remains sealed. A wide shot reveals the plaza at the Ronald Reagan Building in Washington, completed in 1998. The building, the largest federal structure in the district outside the Pentagon, features an elaborate public courtyard with fountains, gardens, and sculptural elements. Original architectural renderings, preserved at the National Building Museum, show a large reflecting pool as the courtyard's centerpiece, a basin approximately 60 feet long and 30 feet wide. The pool appears in renderings dated as late as 1994. However, the completed building has no reflecting pool. In its place, a paved amphitheater with seating for public events. No official explanation for the design change exists in accessible records. The project architect, interviewed for a trade publication in 2000, mentioned only that certain elements were reconsidered during final design phases. Yet excavation permits filed with the district in 1995 include a line item for subsurface water chamber, 22 feet depth, reinforced concrete construction. The permits were approved. Inspection records confirm that the excavation was completed and the chamber constructed, but no reflecting pool was ever installed above it. The chamber, if it exists, lies sealed beneath the amphitheater's paving stones. The building's maintenance staff, when asked about subsurface features, refer inquiries to the General Services Administration. The GSA's response, received after a 4-month delay, states, "Subsurface infrastructure is not accessible to maintenance personnel and is not included in routine building operations documentation." Rain streaks down the glass facade of the federal building in Los Angeles, built in 1940, renovated in 2007. Old photographs show a long, narrow, reflecting pool in the building's entrance plaza, its surface still and perfect, duplicating the vertical lines of the building's Art Deco tower. The pool appears in photographs from 1941, 1952, 1968. After 1968, no photographs show the pool. The plaza appears in later images as a paved courtyard with benches and planters. City building records list the pool's removal as occurring in 1969, the work performed by federal contractor Classified Project. The project's cost, $340,000 in 1969 dollars, equivalent to over $2 million in 2024. For comparison, the pool's original installation in 1940 cost $12,000. The removal cost 28 times more than the installation. A maintenance supervisor who worked at the building from 1965 to 1998 recalled the pool's removal in an oral history interview conducted in 2004. They came in with serious equipment, not a normal demo crew. Military-looking guys, though they wore civilian contractor gear. They drained the pool first, then jackhammered the bottom. I expected them to haul away the debris, but they didn't. They just kept breaking through, going deeper. They brought in a crane to lift out big concrete sections. I watched from the 3rd floor. That excavation went down at least 30 feet, maybe more. After 2 weeks, they sealed it all back up with fresh concrete, poured level with the original plaza grade. Then they paved over it. Fast job, very professional, very quiet. They didn't want anyone watching. Too close. Building security kept people away from the windows on that side. The interviewer asked if he knew why the pool was removed. Official story was structural issues, water damage to subsurface utilities. But that building's foundation is solid, earthquake-proof construction from the start. And there weren't any utilities under that pool. I checked the plans. There was just empty space, a big concrete box sitting under that water. I think they built it for something specific, and when that something became a problem or became obsolete, they took it out, fast and quiet. That's how the government does things it doesn't want to explain. Inside the Eisenhower Executive Office building in Washington, a photograph dated 1888 shows the building's south courtyard during construction. The building, originally designed to house the State, War, and Navy departments, features elaborate Second Empire architecture with mansard roofs and ornamental details. The photograph captures workers installing stonework around what appears to be a courtyard fountain basin. However, a close examination of the photograph reveals that the basin's depth exceeds what would be necessary for a fountain. The excavation visible in the background is at least 10 feet deep, its walls shored with timber. A caption written on the photograph's mounting board says, "Courtyard Water Feature, August 1888. The courtyard today contains no fountain, no basin, no water feature. It is paved with flagstones and used as a pedestrian passage between the building's wings. No record explains what happened to the water feature between 1888 and the present day. However, a maintenance log from 1923, discovered in the building's archive room in 2011, mentions persistent water seepage from sealed courtyard subsurface chamber. The log entry, dated July 8, 1923, describes efforts to improve drainage from the lower level and notes that the chamber continues to hold water despite sealing of all feed lines. A follow-up entry on August 3, 1923 states, "Chamber pumped dry and access hatch welded shut per directives from Assistant Secretary's office. Courtyard pavement reinforced to support restricted access designation. The chamber presumably remains under the courtyard, sealed and forgotten." By the autumn of 1959, in a congressional hearing room in Washington, a subcommittee met to discuss the budget for the General Services Administration, the federal agency responsible for public buildings. The hearing transcript, preserved in the National Archives, includes testimony about decommissioning of certain architectural features in federal buildings constructed during the 1930s and 1940s. The features are not named directly. The testimony refers to them only as water containment structures and exterior reflective elements. A congressman from Ohio asks why so many are being removed. The GSA representative responds, "These features have proven to create unforeseen maintenance burdens and have introduced complications related to building acoustics and structural stability." When pressed for details about the complications, the representative says, "The specifics are technical in nature and relate to ongoing evaluations by the Army Corps of Engineers. We are acting on their recommendations to eliminate these features where feasible." The transcript shows no further questions on the topic. 3 months later, in December 1959, the reflecting pools at 6 federal courthouses across the country were drained and filled in during a coordinated operation completed over a single weekend. The courthouses, Boston, Atlanta, Denver, San Francisco, Minneapolis, and Portland, Oregon. Newspaper articles from the following week note the work only in passing, if at all. The Boston Globe runs a brief item on December 14, 1959. Reflecting pool at federal courthouse removed. The decorative pool at the post office and courthouse building on Post Office Square was removed over the weekend as part of ongoing maintenance work. Officials cited structural concerns and water damage as reasons for the pool's elimination. No structural concerns are detailed. No water damage is documented in any accessible maintenance records. A close-up reveals a budget document from the GSA, fiscal year 1960, showing line item allocations for reflective feature removal and subsurface remediation. The total budget, $4.8 million, equivalent to over $40 million in 2024. The document lists 23 buildings by their federal identification numbers, but does not name them directly. A researcher cross-referencing these numbers with GSA property databases finds that all 23 buildings originally featured reflecting pools. All 23 pools were removed or filled in between 1959 and 1963. The budget line for each building includes not just the removal cost, but a separate allocation for subsurface sealing that exceeds the removal cost by an average of 60%. Focus shifts to a technical drawing, one of several discovered in 2008 during cataloging of a private collection donated to the Library of Congress. The drawing, dated March 1935, shows cross-sectional views of a Federal Plaza water feature. The drawing is detailed and professional, rendered in ink on linen, with precise measurements and material specifications. It shows a reflecting pool 4 feet deep with standard concrete construction. Below the pool, connected by what the drawing labels as acoustic coupling channels, is a second chamber 20 feet deep with walls twice as thick as those of the pool above. The chamber's interior dimensions form precise ratios. Length is 3 times width, depth is 2/3 of length. At the chamber's base, the drawing shows what appear to be baffles or vanes, angled structures that divide the chamber into sections. The drawing includes no explanatory notes about the chamber's purpose. However, a handwritten annotation along the right margin, in faint pencil, says, resonant frequency calculated at 8.2 Hz, adjustable via water depth plus or minus 6 inches. Chamber dimensions based on specifications provided by Dr. H. Fletcher, Bureau of Standards. The drawing is unsigned and undated except for the March 1935 notation. No corresponding architectural project can be definitively linked to this drawing. Yet the design elements, the proportions, the coupling channels, the baffles, match anomalies found at excavation sites when several federal buildings were demolished in the 1970s and 1980s. In the winter of 1971, in a basement archive room at the Department of the Interior, a clerk sorting through files scheduled for off-site storage found a folder marked Water Features Study, 1948 to 1953, classified. The folder contained correspondence between the Bureau of Reclamation and the Public Buildings Service, discussing resonance effects in urban water features and frequency mitigation strategies. Most letters were brief and technical, referring to specific buildings by code numbers. One letter, dated September 12, 1952, stood out. Written by an engineer at the Bureau of Reclamation, it described measurements taken at reflecting pools in 5 government buildings in Washington. The engineer reported that all 5 structures exhibit pronounced low-frequency resonance effects when filled to operational depth. Frequency range 7.5 to 9 Hz. Effects amplified during peak vehicular traffic periods, presumably due to ground vibration input. Building occupants report physiological effects consistent with sustained infrasound exposure, fatigue, headache, disorientation, sensation of presence or unease. The letter recommended immediate draining of the pools and sealing of subsurface chambers. It concluded, the original design intent, whatever it may have been, has produced unintended consequences that pose potential health concerns for building occupants. Recommend discontinuation of all similar installations and review of all existing installations for modification. The clerk who found this folder reported it to his supervisor, who contacted the GSA. 2 days later, representatives from the GSA arrived at the Interior Department, removed the folder, and informed the clerk that the materials were still classified and should not have been accessible. The folder's contents have never been declassified. The clerk, in a memoir published in 2015, described the incident but noted that he remembered few details from the letters after more than 40 years. A medium shot captures the entrance plaza of the U.S. Tax Court building in Washington, completed in 1974. Architectural renderings from 1970 show an elaborate reflecting pool as the plaza's central feature, bordered by low walls and landscaping. The pool in the renderings is large and prominent, designed to reflect the building's modernist facade. However, the completed plaza contains no pool. It is paved entirely with dark granite, broken only by a few raised planters. The architect of record, interviewed in 1982, said only that the pool was eliminated during value engineering in the final design phase. No documentation of this value engineering phase exists in the project's archived files. The construction budget shows no savings from eliminating the pool. In fact, the final cost of the plaza's construction exceeded original estimates by 18%. Yet site preparation photographs from 1972 show excavation work that matches the dimensions and depth indicated in the original renderings. The excavation was completed. The subsurface chamber, if the renderings were followed, was built, but no pool was installed at grade level. Instead, the entire excavation was capped with steel-reinforced concrete and paved over before the building's dedication. A construction foreman who worked on the project described this phase in an interview for a documentary about Washington architecture, filmed in 1998 but never aired. "We built what the drawings told us to build. There was definitely a chamber down there, concrete walls smooth as glass, very precise construction. Then we got change orders saying to seal it and pave over. Not fill it in, mind you, seal it. Difference being, fill suggests it's waste space. Seal suggests it's still functional, just closed off. We sealed it." The camera traces the surface of another remaining reflecting pool, the pool at the National Gallery of Art, installed in 1978. Unlike most government pools, this one has never been drained permanently. It undergoes seasonal maintenance but returns to operation each spring. The pool is shallow, its water clear, its surface rippling gently in the breeze. No anomalies have been reported, no subsurface chambers have been discovered. The pool at the National Gallery is, apparently, exactly what it appears to be, a decorative water feature, nothing more. This raises questions. Why has this pool survived when so many others have not? What makes it different? The answer may lie in its construction. Records from the National Gallery's archives show that the pool was designed and installed by private contractors with no involvement from the Public Building Service or the GSA. The project's funding came from private donors, not federal appropriations. The pool's design is simple: a concrete basin, 3 feet deep at its deepest point, with no subsurface components beyond basic plumbing. Ground-penetrating radar scans conducted during a 2005 renovation confirm this. There is nothing beneath the pool but compacted earth and utility lines. The pool at the National Gallery is what the others claim to have been, but were not. In 2012, a civil engineering student at George Washington University wrote a thesis examining acoustic properties of public spaces in federal buildings constructed between 1930 and 1960. The thesis, available in the university's digital archives, includes a chapter on reflecting pools and their relationship to building acoustics. The student, using publicly available architectural plans and contemporary acoustic modeling software, attempted to analyze the resonant frequencies of several buildings known to have featured reflecting pools. His models incorporated not just the pools visible at grade level, but also the subsurface chambers documented in maintenance reports and demolition records. The results, the student noted, were unexpected. "When I modeled the complete system, pool, coupling channels, subsurface chamber, the structures functioned as Helmholtz resonators, acoustic devices that amplify specific frequencies. The dimensions and proportions of the chambers I analyzed all produced resonance in the infrasound range, below 20 Hz. Infrasound at these frequencies, especially between 7 and 10 Hz, has documented physiological effects on humans: nausea, disorientation, and a sensation often described as dread or presence. The effect is strongest when the infrasound is sustained and when it occurs in enclosed spaces. Government buildings with interior courtyards or lobbies would create exactly these conditions." The thesis supervisor, a professor of structural engineering, added a note to the student's final submission. "While the analysis is technically sound, the conclusions suggest intentional design for infrasound generation, which seems implausible. More likely, the acoustic effects were unintended consequences of design elements created for structural or aesthetic purposes." The student did not pursue further research on the topic after graduation. The thesis has been downloaded from the university's archive database 73 times since 2012. Most downloads occurred in the weeks following several online forum discussions about secret frequency weapons and government mind control architecture. The thesis itself makes no such claims. It presents only the acoustic analysis and notes the physiological effects of infrasound as documented in scientific literature. By the spring of 2015, in a small office at the National Park Service, a historian researching Depression-era public works projects compiled data on reflecting pools installed at federal buildings during the 1930s. The historian's goal was to create an inventory of New Deal-era decorative features for preservation planning. What he found instead was a pattern. Of 57 reflecting pools identified in photographs and construction records from 1932 to 1941, only 3 remain in operation today. 54 have been removed, drained, or filled in. The removals cluster in 3 periods: 1951 to 1954, 1959 to 1963, and 1979 to 1985. These periods correspond, roughly, with shifts in federal building policy, with changes in the GSA's leadership, and with the declassification of certain acoustic weapons research conducted during World War II and the Cold War. The historian noted this correlation in his draft report. When the draft was reviewed by the Park Service's legal department, the section discussing the correlation was flagged as speculative and potentially inflammatory. The historian was asked to remove it. He complied, but he saved the original draft. In a footnote visible only in that original version, he wrote, "The clustering of removals during periods associated with military acoustic research may be coincidental. However, the speed and coordination of the removals, combined with the significant costs involved and the lack of detailed public explanation, suggests that the pool's elimination was driven by factors beyond routine maintenance or aesthetic preference." Further research into classified military and intelligence programs of these periods may provide context. The final version of the historian's report, published by the Park Service in 2016, catalogs the Depression-era reflecting pools in neutral, descriptive language. It notes that most have been removed, but offers no analysis of why or when. The report has been cited in 3 preservation, planning documents, and 1 architectural history dissertation. None of these subsequent works explore the pattern of removals. Focus shifts to a contemporary scene: a plaza at a modern federal building in Portland, Oregon, constructed in 2009. The building's design is glass and steel, minimalist and transparent, a sharp contrast to the monumental neoclassical structures of earlier eras. The plaza features no reflecting pool. Instead, a shallow water feature runs along one edge, a narrow channel, perhaps a foot wide, where water flows over polished stone. The channel is decorative, clearly non-functional beyond aesthetics. It holds no standing water, creates no reflections, generates no resonance. It is the opposite of the old reflecting pools: active rather than still, shallow rather than deep, linear rather than planar. The building's architect, interviewed for a design magazine in 2010, explained, "Water features today are about movement and interaction. Static pools feel dated, a holdover from a different era. We wanted something dynamic, something that engages people without creating maintenance burdens or safety concerns." When asked if the design team considered a traditional reflecting pool, the architect said, "It was discussed early on, but feedback from the client, the GSA, was clear. No reflecting pools. They have issues with standing water features at this scale. We didn't push back. There are plenty of other ways to incorporate water into a design." Rain begins to fall on the Portland Plaza, droplets striking the flowing channel, creating temporary ripples that are carried away by the current. The water feature cannot hold or accumulate. It cannot create depth, cannot form a resonant cavity, cannot interact with the building structure in any way beyond the visual. It is purely decorative, purely surface, purely controlled. This, perhaps, is the point. In 2019, a commuter passing through the plaza at the Lincoln Memorial pauses at the edge of the reflecting pool. It is early morning, the sun just rising, the air cool and still. The pool's surface shows the pattern again: concentric ripples forming from multiple points, interfering, creating standing waves. The commuter takes out her phone and records a 30-second video. She posts it to social media with the caption, "What causes this? There's no wind, no boats, nothing disturbing the water, just these waves, always the same pattern." The video receives 2,000 views in a day, then is taken down. Her account is suspended for violating community guidelines on misinformation. When the account is restored 3 days later, the video is gone and no explanation is provided. The commuter re-records the phenomenon the following week. This time she keeps the video private, shares it only with a small online group interested in architectural anomalies. Someone in the group analyzes the video frame by frame, measures the spacing between wave peaks, calculates a frequency, approximately 7.9 Hz. Another member of the group notes that this frequency is close to the Schumann resonances. the natural electromagnetic frequencies of the Earth's atmosphere, which peak around 7.83 Hz. A third member points out that the pool is not an electromagnetic system, but a physical one, and that the correlation is likely meaningless. The group's discussion continues for several pages, then tapers off. No consensus is reached. The video remains private. The Lincoln Memorial's reflecting pool, installed in 1922, was part of the McMillan Plan, a comprehensive redesign of Washington's monumental core. The plan, developed at the turn of the 20th century, sought to impose order and grandeur on the Capitol's landscape, creating sweeping vistas and symmetrical compositions that evoked imperial Rome. The reflecting pool, stretching nearly a third of a mile from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument, was the plan's signature element, a vast mirror that doubled the monument's visual impact. Unlike the pools at other government buildings, the Lincoln Memorial Pool was never enclosed, never subterranean, never part of a building's structural system. It is a landscape feature, open to the sky, shallow, simple. Yet, even this pool has its mysteries. Construction photographs from 1922 show excavation that went deeper than the plan specified. The pool's design depth was 18 inches. The excavation reached 4 feet in places. Contractors explain this as necessary for drainage and stability, for preventing groundwater seepage and ensuring the pool's foundation remained level. However, core samples taken during a 1980s renovation revealed that beneath the pool's concrete basin, at a depth of approximately 10 feet, is a layer of compacted clay that is not native to the site. The clay appears to have been brought in and carefully graded to create a uniform subsurface. Below the clay, at 12 feet, ground-penetrating radar detected anomalies, voids or cavities that do not match the surrounding geology. These anomalies were noted in the renovation project's engineering report and then dismissed as probable historical fill irregularities. No further investigation was conducted. A close-up reveals a maintenance log from the Lincoln Memorial dated August 1968. The entry, written in cramped handwriting, describes unusual water disturbance observed in reflecting pool, early morning hours, no wind, no visible cause. The ranger on duty noted that the disturbance created waves radiating from 3 distinct points along the pool's center line, waves intersecting to form complex patterns. The ranger attempted to locate the sources of the disturbance by wading into the pool, but found nothing. No submerged pumps, no jets, no mechanical devices. The water was still at the bottom, undisturbed. Only at the surface did the waves appear. The entry concludes, phenomenon lasted approximately 20 minutes, then ceased. Pool returned to normal calm. No explanation determined. Similar entries appear sporadically in the decades since. Rangers and maintenance staff report the phenomenon several times per year, always in early morning or late evening, always under calm conditions. The reports follow a pattern. Waves appear, persist for 10 to 30 minutes, then cease without explanation. No official investigation has been conducted. The National Park Service, which manages the memorial and its pool, classifies the reports as minor observational anomalies, likely due to groundwater movement or subsurface thermal gradients. This explanation satisfies no one who has witnessed the phenomenon, but it closes the issue without further inquiry. By the autumn of 2021, during pandemic lockdowns, when Washington's monuments stood empty, cameras positioned for security monitoring captured the reflecting pool, exhibiting the wave pattern every morning for 19 consecutive days. The footage, reviewed later by Park Service staff, showed no human presence, no wildlife, no obvious external cause, just the waves forming and interfering, creating patterns that one staff member described as almost mathematical, like something generated by a program. The footage was archived as unusual but non-threatening activity. No analysis was commissioned. No public disclosure was made. The camera pulls back to show the reflecting pool in its entirety, a long rectangular expanse of dark water, flanked by grass and gravel paths, terminating at the Lincoln Memorial's white marble facade. The pool is iconic, photographed millions of times, featured in films and documentaries, present in the collective memory of anyone who has studied American history or visited the Capitol. It is, in every practical sense, just a pool, water, concrete, grass, stone. Yet the reports persist, the patterns appear. The measurements, when taken, show frequencies that should not exist in a body of water without mechanical input. The subsurface anomalies remain unexplained. Today, across the United States, the few reflecting pools that remain at government buildings are carefully monitored, their maintenance records detailed and precise. Water levels are regulated to specific depths, often with automated systems that adjust for evaporation and rainfall. Filtration systems run continuously, preventing algae growth and maintaining water clarity. The pools are treated as critical infrastructure, not decorative elements. Access to subsurface areas, where such areas exist, is strictly controlled. Maintenance personnel must follow protocols that specify exactly how work is to be conducted around the pools, with emphasis on avoiding disturbances to water levels or basin integrity. In Las Vegas, at the Regional Justice Center completed in 2005, a small reflecting pool was included in the original design. The pool measures 20 feet by 10 feet, shallow and unremarkable. However, during construction, workers discovered that the site's geology, compacted caliche and clay, created unexpected acoustic effects in the building's central atrium. Sounds would linger, overlapping, creating a disorienting echo. Acoustic engineers were brought in. They recommended several solutions, including sound-absorbing panels and strategic placement of barriers. They also noted that the reflecting pool, if filled to a specific depth and positioned correctly, could help mitigate the acoustic issue by providing a surface that absorbed rather than reflected sound at certain frequencies. The pool was built as designed, filled to a depth of 8 inches, and the atrium's acoustic problem resolved. The engineers noted in their final report, the pool functions as a passive acoustic treatment, effective across the range of frequencies associated with human speech and ambient noise. The effect is subtle but measurable, contributing to an overall reduction in reverberation time of approximately 15%. No mention is made of lower frequencies, of infrasound, of resonance. The pool at the Regional Justice Center remains in operation, maintained by the County Facilities Department, unremarkable and functional. Yet when asked, the project's lead acoustic engineer, interviewed in 2019, acknowledged that the pool's effect extended beyond the frequencies he cited in his report. "We measured everything, including subsonic ranges, just to be thorough. The pool did affect frequencies below 20 Hz, but we didn't emphasize that in the report because it wasn't relevant to the client's concerns. The atrium's acoustic issue was about speech intelligibility and ambient comfort, not about things people can't hear. But yes, the pool dampened some infrasound, probably coming from HVAC systems and structural vibration. It's not unusual. Any large body of water in an enclosed or semi-enclosed space will interact with low-frequency sound. Whether that interaction is beneficial or problematic depends on design, specifics. When asked if he was aware of the historical use of reflecting pools at government buildings and the subsequent removal of most such pools, the engineer paused. "I've heard rumors. Old-timers in the field sometimes mention projects from the 1930s and 40s, where pools were installed for reasons that weren't entirely aesthetic. But it's not something you find in textbooks or professional literature. If those pools were designed to manipulate building acoustics, especially low frequencies, the science supports the possibility. Infrasound can affect people. That's well documented. Whether anyone would deliberately design public buildings to generate infrasound is a different question. I can't imagine why anyone would, but the fact that so many pools were removed so quickly, with such minimal public explanation, does make you wonder. A wide shot reveals the plaza at the Thurgood Marshall Federal Judiciary Building in Washington, completed in 1992. The plaza is paved, functional, devoid of water features. Original design documents, available through the courthouse's public records, show that a reflecting pool was part of the initial concept but was removed during schematic design, replaced with landscaping and benches. The architect's notes, preserved in the project archive, include a single line about the change. Client requested elimination of water feature citing operational concerns. No details about the concerns are provided. The change added 6 weeks to the design schedule and increased costs by an estimated $200,000. Primarily due to redesigning the plaza's drainage and irrigation systems to accommodate the landscaping. A pool would have been simpler and cheaper, yet it was eliminated. This pattern repeats in federal building projects from the 1990s onward. Reflecting pools appear in early design phases, then vanish before construction. The reasons cited are vague: maintenance, security, cost, operational concerns. Yet, alternatives that are more complex and expensive are routinely approved. The message is clear: reflecting pools, regardless of their aesthetic or functional merits, are not acceptable in federal architecture. The policy is unwritten but universally applied. In 2017, the GSA issued updated design guidelines for federal buildings, a document running over 400 pages. The guidelines cover everything from accessibility standards to energy efficiency to blast-resistant construction. Water features are mentioned briefly in a section on landscaping. The guidelines state, reflecting pools and large standing water features are discouraged due to maintenance requirements and security considerations. Where water features are desired, preference should be given to flowing or recirculating designs that minimize standing water volume. No historical context is provided, no explanation of what the security considerations might be. Just a directive: avoid standing water. Focus shifts to a satellite image of downtown Washington, showing the locations of government buildings constructed between 1920 and 1960. Red markers indicate buildings that featured reflecting pools at some point in their history. Blue markers indicate buildings where those pools have been removed. The map is almost entirely blue. Only 3 red markers remain: the Lincoln Memorial, the Capitol reflecting pool, and one small pool at the Library of Congress that was retained and restored during a 1990s renovation. Every other pool, more than 40 in the district alone, is gone. If the pools were purely decorative, their removal might be explained by changing tastes, by the modernist preference for clean lines and minimal ornamentation. But the removals occurred across multiple architectural eras, under administrations with differing aesthetic philosophies. The speed and coordination suggest a purpose beyond aesthetics. The costs involved, the lack of transparency, the gaps in the archival record, all point toward decisions made for reasons that were never meant to be public. The camera lingers on the Capitol reflecting pool, one of the survivors. Installed in 1971, the pool stretches in front of the Capitol's west front, a long rectangle that mirrors the building's white dome. The pool is well maintained, its water clear, its edges sharp. It has never been drained for more than routine maintenance. It has never been filled in or converted. It remains as designed, functional, apparently free of the problems that plagued other pools. Perhaps its survival is due to its visibility, its prominence, its role in the Capitol's iconography. Or perhaps its design avoided whatever flaw existed in the others. Without access to subsurface construction details, without documentation of the pool's acoustic properties, without records of any issues that might have arisen, the question remains open. In 2023, a graduate student in architectural history at Cornell University submitted a thesis proposal to study the cultural and political significance of reflecting pools in American government architecture. The proposal included plans to interview former GSA officials, to review declassified military acoustic research from the 1940s and 50s, and to conduct acoustic modeling of buildings that once featured reflecting pools. The thesis advisor approved the proposal. The university's institutional review board approved the research plan. However, when the student began contacting former GSA officials for interviews, responses were uniformly negative. Most declined to participate. One former official, retired for over 20 years, wrote back, "I'm not comfortable discussing that topic. I signed agreements when I left federal service that still apply. I suggest you focus your research on aspects of government architecture that have better documentation." The student shifted his focus to a broader examination of modernist government architecture, eliminating the specific focus on reflecting pools. The thesis, completed in 2024, includes a brief section on water features but treats them as aesthetic elements within the context of mid-century design philosophy. The section makes no mention of acoustics, of removals, of subsurface chambers, of any of the anomalies documented in maintenance records and demolition reports. The thesis was accepted, published in the university's digital repository, and cited in 2 subsequent papers on government architecture. The original, narrower proposal remains in the student's personal files, unfinished. The pattern continues. Information remains scattered, fragmented, siloed in archives that few researchers access. Maintenance records, when they survive, are buried in folders marked routine operations. Demolition reports note subsurface anomalies in technical language that obscures their significance. Photographs show what existed, but not why it existed or why it was removed. Oral histories capture fragments of memory, filtered through decades, colored by uncertainty. The full story, if it exists, remains out of reach, protected by classification, by bureaucratic inertia, by the simple passage of time. If history is written by those who control the archives, what happens when the archives themselves are structured to hide rather than reveal? When documents are misfiled, when records are destroyed after mandated retention periods, when oral histories are dismissed as anecdotal, when photographs are cataloged without context, when technical drawings are separated from the projects they describe, the result is not absence of history, but fragmentation of history, a puzzle with missing pieces scattered across decades and institutions. Today, in cities across the country, the plazas where reflecting pools once stood are quiet and dry, pavement where water once mirrored sky, planters where reflections once doubled architecture. The pools are gone, their absence so complete that most people who walk these spaces have no idea what was there before. The history has been paved over, literally and figuratively, replaced by surfaces that are easy to maintain, safe to navigate, free of mystery. But below the pavement, in some cases, the chambers remain. Sealed, empty, forgotten, they wait in darkness, their concrete walls smooth and precise, their dimensions calculated to ratios that once had meaning. They serve no purpose now, if they ever served a purpose. They are ghosts of infrastructure, remnants of intentions that may have been architectural, structural, acoustic, or something else entirely. They endure not because they matter, but because removing them completely would cost more than simply sealing them and moving on. In 2024, a commuter walking past the site of the old federal building in Seattle pauses on the sidewalk. The building is long gone, replaced by a modern office tower with ground floor retail. The sidewalk is wide, paved with interlocking bricks in a herringbone pattern. Nothing indicates that 60 years ago, this was the location of a reflecting pool, a courtyard, a space designed to mirror the neoclassical facade that once stood here. The commuter feels something, a vibration, a hum, a pressure that might be imagination or might be the city's infrastructure, trains and tunnels, generators in basements, traffic on bridges, resonating through the ground. The sensation passes, the commuter continues walking. The city moves on, as cities do, layer upon layer, each era building over the last, each present obscuring its past.